I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. The U.S. military keeps helping evacuate Americans and some Afghans, but what about those who helped us in the war the Taliban won't let get to the capital?
We're going to get only the people probably out of Kabul, and that's going to haunt me for the rest of my life because there's another 50,000 people outside of Kabul that we're going to leave behind. And for me, that's the equivalent of leaving behind someone who is Jewish in Nazi Germany.
I'm Jessica Rosenthal. The head of Homeland Security admits what's happening at the border isn't sustainable, as an outgoing Border Patrol chief warns of an increase in terrorist suspects coming in through Mexico.
I think that's something that the American people need to understand, that this isn't just immigration. This is about drugs. This is about cartel activity. And this is about national security.
I'm Liz Peek. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The Taliban is back in power, setting up a new Afghan government after taking over while U.S. troops pulled out.
We were clear-eyed going in when we made this decision that it was possible that the Taliban would end up in control of Afghanistan.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says they keep evacuating Americans and
the Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport.
But the Taliban claims all Afghans who helped the U.S. during the war are forgiven.
We do not want them to leave the country. We want them to serve their own homeland.
Taliban spokesman Zubiullah Mujahid also claims
women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society.
But many Republicans in Congress fear the Taliban's return means al-Qaeda and terror's return. GOP Senator Lindsey Graham tells Fox News Radio
he has set in motion, President Biden, a pathway to another 9/11.
Former President Trump, who started the withdrawal process and wanted us out of Afghanistan, told Fox's Hannity, "It's not that we left. It's the grossly incompetent way we left." And we talked to a Democrat who agrees it didn't go well.
A disaster of epic proportions that was eminently preventable.
Matt Zeller is a former U.S. Army major and ex-CIA analyst who co-founded a group several years ago to help our Afghan allies leave called No One Left Behind.
You know, I've been part of a coalition of individuals that has been spending the better part of the last year desperately trying to get the American government, first the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, to plan for what they're now attempting to pull off, which is the largest humanitarian airlift since 1948, since the Berlin airlift. We're going to get only the people probably out of Kabul, and that's going to haunt me for the rest of my life because there's another 50,000 people outside of Kabul that we're going to leave behind. And for me, that's the equivalent of leaving behind someone who is Jewish in Nazi Germany.
Wow. This is very personal for you.
I have family who are there. My sister was there. I just got confirmation about an hour before we recorded this that she was finally put on a plane and she's flying back to the United States. This is deeply personal. How
scary was it for you until you found out that she's going to be able to get back, that she would be stuck there?
I've slept 3 hours in the last 72. I was on the phone at 4 o'clock this morning with her at the gate at the airport to help her talk her way past the Marine guards there and let them know that she was an American citizen. Thankfully, they were more than professional. They were amazing. I can't even begin to imagine the nightmare that they're dealing with. You just have thousands upon thousands of Afghans who are trying to get to the one airport that they know is their lifeline to freedom and safety. In between them is a Taliban army that is now setting up checkpoints. We have gotten confirmation from multiple sources on the ground that the Taliban have a checkpoint 100 meters from the Americans at the airport. And what they're doing is anybody who shows up that has English in their phone, they're confiscating their phone. They're telling people that they're making a list and that they're going to be back for people once the Americans leave.
And you believe that's probably going to happen?
I know it's already happening because I also am talking to people in places that aren't Kabul, cities like Kandahar and Herat and Mazar-e-Sharif. And what they're telling me is that there was already a mass execution in Kandahar in which they made people come to the stadium to watch people be publicly beheaded. Women have been fired from all of their jobs everywhere. They're not allowed to work anymore, at least outside of Kabul. And they're going door to door looking for the people who worked for us. And unlike in Kabul, where they're just making a list of people that they plan to be back for once we're gone, the people that they're looking for in the outlying cities are disappearing, never to be seen again.
The Taliban in Kabul, as they're having negotiations trying to set up a government, they're claiming that everyone is forgiven. Amnesty for all Afghans. And they want to have an inclusive government. And hey, women are welcome. You believe any of that?
No. I've not believed the Taliban since the nanosecond I first laid eyes on them in 2008, personally. These aren't people who can be trusted.
You were there. When you were in Afghanistan, you were also with Afghan forces, correct? You helped train those fighters?
I lived on an Afghan army base in the middle of a province called Ghazni. The people that I spent most of my year with were Afghans. I had about 20 other Americans on our little outpost and a hell of a lot of Afghans around us. And let me tell you something. I don't blame them for losing this. These are people who, despite the fact that they were never paid on time, or if ever, that they often didn't have fuel or ammunition or proper equipment, proper training. And despite all of that, they kept showing up to the fight time and time again.
Now, on Monday, President Biden, as you watched, said that leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed sometime without trying to fight. And he then said that, if anything, it reinforces that ending the U.S. military involvement now was the right decision. No? Yes?
I think ending the war was absolutely the right decision. Shame on us for having a war that clearly was unwinnable go on this long. But here's the thing. When you end a war, how you end it is just as important as why the war was fought. No one wanted this type of an exit. No one wanted this.
So what should have happened? What would be the better way to have exited?
6 months ago, it wasn't fighting season. We had we had 2,500 troops in place. It's not too far-fetched to imagine 6 months ago starting to send out special operations teams to remote villages to helicopter our allies back to these air bases and then quietly, over time, methodically flying them back to the United States like we are now. That's what should have happened. By the way, that still could. We lack the political conviction to do the right thing now. We could still go in and retake these airfields. The Taliban are terrified of us. They're not going to risk a return to an all-out war with us simply because we're trying to evacuate people that, quite frankly, they don't want in their country to begin with.
Back to President Biden on Monday.
The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching.
But at the same time, he defended the U.S. troop withdrawal.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
As for why they didn't evacuate Afghan allies sooner, the president says the government in Kabul discouraged that, fearing a mass exodus would lead to a crisis in confidence. Matt Zeller disagrees.
We wouldn't be facing this crisis now. A crisis that is quite frankly of our own creation because we refused to do the right thing when we could have. And that is something that I am going to have to live with for the rest of my life as a profound failure on my part, because clearly I wasn't effective enough in getting my government to pay attention. And that's a moral injury that I now know all too well what Vietnam veterans felt like. I'm still talking to people in Taliban-occupied cities, and what they're telling me is their lives are over. And what makes me so emotional is that to a person, they're not angry with us. They forgive us. They're still proud of having served with Americans. They still believed in the future that we were all fighting for them in their country. And they still believed that their service was worthwhile and they would have done it all over again if given the opportunity. Those types of people are absolutely worth saving. We should be moving heaven and earth to get them.
Your organization, No One Left Behind, you have helped evacuate Afghans over the years with these special visas. What can you do? What can your organization do? Are you even able to do anything?
Right now, there is an army of people, folks from No One Left Behind, from the Association of Wartime Allies, from all sorts of different organizations. And we're all now fighting to do one thing: mount the largest airlift ever, probably in the history of humankind.
What about the administration? Do you think President Biden will go along with that? He's the commander-in-chief.
I hope so. The indication from the Defense Department seems to be that at least they're committed to Kabul. Our goal is now, as we've said, we have a beachhead. We need to keep that beachhead open for as long as we possibly can to get as many people as we possibly can out with whatever time we have left remaining. That time frame should not be dictated to us by the Taliban. I know that people might hate this, but sometimes human rights have to be defended at the barrel end of a gun. There are really, truly evil people in this world. I am not being hyperbolic when I say that the Taliban are the modern day equivalent of the Nazi Party.
When Afghanistan, city after city, started to fall last week, did you think we would get to the point where Kabul was overrun by the weekend?
Yes. What we did not expect was the complete and total capitulation of the Ghani government. And seemingly, they handed Kabul over without almost firing a shot. An Islamic insurgency just overthrew their democratically elected government. And let's be clear about this. They're now one of the largest military powers in Central Asia. They have a fully functioning Air Force because they inherited the Afghan military. So all of our U.S. military equipment, all the Humvees, the MRAPs, all of the M4s, machine guns, the armed freaking drones, they have it all. This is not the Taliban of the 90s. This is Taliban 2.0. And that scares the daylights out of me, because what happens when Al-Qaeda 2.0 decides to finally make Afghanistan its new headquarters?
So that's, of course, a big fear. There have been critics of the president who said we should have left a small force. We already had a small force that would help to prevent what happened in the collapse of the government. If we left a couple thousand troops, do you think we would be in the situation today we're in?
No. If we had done this in an orderly way, if we had set up and indicated to the Taliban that, no, we're going to maintain a robust, counterterrorism presence that is going to be able to bomb you to smithereens, that this withdrawal, the Trump administration might have said it's the 1st of May, but congratulations, you're not a legitimate government. I don't understand why we continue to negotiate with people who have no right to rule. Who elected them? No one. We shouldn't have been negotiating them in good faith to begin with. We should have been telling them we're going to leave when we feel like it. But that entirely is on the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo are just as guilty and is just as complicit in the deaths that are about to befall our Afghan allies as the Taliban. They made this deal. It's on them for now having put us into this mess. I still, however, and I'm saying this to you as a proud Democrat, blame my party. And this is where I wish the Republicans in this country would learn from this example. I blame my party. I'm going to hold my president accountable. I'm going to call for public hearings held by Congress to get to the bottom of this. I hope it's my party that investigates this, because that's what responsible leadership looks like. And that's what we've got to get back to in this country. If you care about American soldiers coming home from future wars like I did, well, the only reason I'm talking to you today is because an Afghan saved my life in a battle. I made him a promise that we would honor that life debt. We now need to keep that promise for the over 100,000 Afghans that remain left behind.
The one who saved your life, is he out of the country?
Yeah, he's out of the country. I was able to get him out 8 years ago.
And now you're hoping that the rest of them can come too.
I am. I'm not an overtly religious person, but I haven't prayed more in my life. All I want is for us to save these people. I know we can do it. I know we have the resources to do it. I know we have the might to do it. I pray that we find the will.
Matt Zeller, former U.S. Army Major, ex-CIA analyst, co-founder of No One Left Behind. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Talk soon.
This is Liz Peek with your Fox News commentary coming up.
July saw a record high number of migrant apprehensions at the U.S.-Mexico border, more than 212,000. And President Biden's Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said during a recent visit with agents in Texas that it was unprecedented.
The rise in encounters of migrants at the southern border began in April of 2020, last year, but the increase is most certainly sharper over the past several months and greater than in June.
Privately, though, Mayorkas took a straightforward tone with agents in audio obtained by Fox News reporter Bill Malugin out of Texas last week.
This is unsustainable. These numbers cannot continue. We cannot get to a point where we were a couple weeks ago.
case that was hard to hear, he said this is unsustainable. These numbers cannot continue. He also told the agents that if the border is our first line of defense, then we are going to lose. Meanwhile, he says most adult migrants are being turned away under Title 42, a public health authorization due to COVID. Unaccompanied minors, though, are not being expelled under Title 42.
Yeah, I think it's a really astonishing comments. These comments were behind closed doors to DHS officials, law enforcement officials.
Chad Wolf is former acting Homeland Security Secretary and a current Heritage Foundation visiting fellow.
But it's very different than the message that he's telling the American people and to members of Congress as he testifies, where he says the border is closed, the border is secure, we have this under control. And then he's telling his law enforcement officers who actually are working on the border, so they know the difference. They know that the border is not open and the border is not secure. And so he's trying to connect with them and reassure them that he knows what they're going through. But in doing so, he has demonstrated that he's got two sets of talking points, one for the American public and Congress, and then one for all the officials at DHS. So it's quite startling. I made sure that, as acting secretary when I was there, that it was the same message, whether it was to DHS officials and law enforcement officers or to the American people. And that's what the American people are so frustrated at, is the crisis that's on the border today, is that this administration is not being upfront with them and not telling the truth about what's going on.
Well, if the truth is that this is unsustainable and we are going to lose, whatever that means, what happens now? And does what happens next sort of depend? Because it looks like Secretary Mayorkas is maybe between a rock and a hard place, between what his boss, the president, maybe wants border policy to look like versus what he knows it looks like and what he finds to be unsustainable. Like, what does he do with these two competing things?
Well, sure, but that's his job. It's a difficult job, is to talk to White House officials, whether that's the president, the vice president, or others, and let them know what his department is capable of doing along that border and what's achievable and what's not. And so, again, when you have these comments and you hear that it's not winnable, I think that what it tells you is that the failed border security strategy that we've seen over the last 7 months is just that. It's failed. They need a new strategy. They need a new approach to turn this crisis around, because if they continue to do what they've been doing for 6.5, 7 months now, you're just going to have more of the same. So hopefully the comments were a turning point. I don't suspect that policy will change, although I can be hopeful. But the policy needs to change to really address this crisis, because everything that they continue to do doesn't really make a dent in the crisis. It gets worse month after month after month.
I want your reaction to outgoing Border Patrol Chief Rodney Scott's comments. I guess a recording of him was obtained by the Washington Examiner, and he was telling fellow agents that when they talk about what their mission is, and this is a quote from him, "I firmly believe that it is a national security crisis. Immigration is just a subcomponent of it, and right now it's just a cover for massive amounts of smuggling, to include TSDBs at a level we've never seen before." TSDBs, terrorist screening database alerts. So in other words, suspected terrorists. He's saying that folks like that are coming at a level we've never seen before.
What he is saying there is what we've known all along. And it really, I would implore Congress and others to really investigate what the premise of what he is saying there, which is, it's not only do you have family members, you have families and minors and others coming across this border, but you have a criminal element and you have a national security element there, such as suspected terrorists coming across that border. And the administration and the department hasn't been very honest with the American people in really outlining that. And you can do that in a way where you can talk around classified information. But if there are really suspected terrorists who are embedding themselves with this flow, and we know that either by intelligence or we've apprehended them, I think that's something that the American people need to understand, that this isn't just immigration. This is about drugs. This is about cartel activity. And this is about national security.
Now, former Chief Patrol Agent Roy Villareal retired just about 8 months ago. And he says the border is not just an opportunity for economic migrants, but a myriad of criminal elements.
In the 31 years, almost 32 years of border security that I provided, There's only one other time that I saw the border this vulnerable, and it was back in the late 80s. But the threat was very different. The threat was more, these were economic migrants, and it was just a volume of people that were coming across the border. That threat compared to today's threat do not equate to one another. Today, we are faced with a border system that is overwhelmed by family units and unaccompanied children, which has drawn away agents from their focus on border security because now they're in the business of caring and looking after these migrants. And what that has done is created tremendous gaps and vulnerabilities. And these are going to be exploited. They're exploited today by the criminal organizations, but I assure you, terrorists are looking for the same opportunities, and they will exploit them.
When you heard Scott's comments that there is this increase in TSDBs, terrorist screening database alerts, is that accurate?
One of the things we have to take in consideration is that the U.S. Border Patrol encounters people from throughout the world. From Venezuela all the way to Afghanistan. And in that mix of people that are encountered, you do find people that are either associated, affiliated, or in some manner maybe related to terrorism.
Are they coming, do they get an airplane ticket and fly from, Jordan to, Argentina? I mean, how does this work?
Smuggling in and of itself is a multi-billion-dollar industry that traverses the entire globe. And as it relates to hardcore criminals, special interest aliens, those associated or affiliated with terrorism, there are very sophisticated criminal networks that cater to this type of client. And there are established routes that are utilized that traverse the globe. And in some cases, they're coming, literally, they're flying straight into Mexico and right to our border.
I want to shift gears. I want to talk about COVID. How bad is it? I imagine you still speak to folks on the border, your friends. I'm wondering, even though you're retired, how bad is the COVID situation? Because we're hearing, the president himself has said we're still operating under Title 42, right? We're still expelling migrants, not all of them, but many of them due to COVID, and yet. City officials in McAllen, Texas, opening up, quarantine centers for migrants with COVID. What are agents dealing with when it comes to this infectious disease?
The dangers that the agents face at the border in and of itself, from narcotic smugglers to weapons traffickers to just violent criminals, is one thing in and of itself. But now we've introduced COVID. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, a number of agents, as well as a number of officers at the ports of entry, have been exposed, have contracted COVID, and have died as a result of it. So COVID is a reality that the agents face every day, and it just complicates and amplifies the dangers that they face.
And when you talk about being overwhelmed, let's talk about those July numbers, right? Because that was apparently a record for apprehensions, over 200,000 in 1 month alone. I'm used to hearing, as a Southern California native, I'm used to hearing about sort of a downtick in people coming in the summer because it's so hot. We're not seeing that trend this year.
Traditionally, there's normally a downtick beginning in early summer, all the way up through October. That has ebbed over the last few years, but the border as it sits today, and this is based on my 30 years of working in border security, is the most vulnerable it's been in 2 decades. The flow of illegal migration, the volume, and the type of population that's coming across the border is simply overwhelming the capabilities and the capacity of the Border Patrol, of ERO, of ICE, of the Department of Homeland Security as a whole. And it's unprecedented. It's created a tremendous weakness and opportunity for criminals and terrorists to exploit.
Finally, when you heard Secretary Mayorkas say privately to agents in Texas that this flow is unsustainable and that if the border is our first line of defense, then we are going to lose, what did you think? And did it give you any hope, I guess, for lack of a better word, that DHS sees the problem clearly for what it is?
We need to acknowledge and accept that border security equates to national security. And the fact that the Secretary of Homeland Security is acknowledging that this is unsustainable, is it encouraging? Slightly. But the reality is the effort and the focus that's been applied towards border security thus far has been an utter failure. The administration it's innovative in its approach. It's hoping to reach back into the host countries, but that investment takes time. That investment is a decade or 2 decades from now. We need a focus that addresses border security today while simultaneously addressing those other aspects. But do I have a sense of hope or encouragement based on the fact that the Secretary acknowledged that this is unsustainable? Absolutely not. There's been an awareness of the situation at the border for months now. And prior to the administration assuming its reign, they were briefed on the threats. They were briefed on our understanding of what was happening south of the border and throughout the globe. So their awareness was on par day one. And this is just simply an utter failure to address that.
Former Chief Patrol Agent Roy Villareal, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, and I'm inviting you to join a new conversation with the smartest thinkers out there about the country and where we're going. Subscribe to the Ben Domenech Podcast.
Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Liz Peek, what's on your mind?
Americans are wondering, is Joe Biden up to the job? Among the alarming developments of the past week for Team Biden was a report showing that consumer sentiment absolutely collapsed in early August. The index plunged to 70.2 from 81.2 the month before, posting one of the biggest drops on record and reaching the worst level since 2011. That spells trouble for the economy and for Biden. Why are consumers suddenly unhappy? Let me count the ways. First, the pandemic is back in force. Just as Americans began to hope that vaccines would lead us back to normalcy, the Delta variant has roared through the nation, jeopardizing our recovery summer and crushing optimism. The COVID-19 case count soared to 214,000 on August 13th, from just under 7,000 2 months ago. Worse, hospitalizations and deaths have turned up as well. Team Biden politicized the entire vaccination effort, blaming Republicans for the disappointing uptake on the shots. The reality is that many Americans, and especially many in the Black community, are wary of the medication, in part because the FDA has yet to approve it. It turns out politicizing COVID-19 was a stupid thing to do. It will haunt Biden. Next, prices on just about everything we buy are going up. And again, the White House has not helped. After repeating endlessly that price hikes would be transitory, the administration pivoted to different language, but the same message. Inflation was the result of temporary blockages and would quickly disappear. Americans don't buy it. A recent report from the New York Federal Reserve showed consumers expect prices to continue rising over the next 3 years. That's bad news because consumer expectations actually can drive inflation. Meanwhile, our nation is suffering humiliation in Afghanistan, and that country faces unimaginable tragedy. Biden called for an immediate withdrawal of U.S. forces from that sad nation, and the consequences already are so horrific that he is now sending in thousands of troops to secure the safety of our own people. When CNN's Jake Tapper opens his interview with Secretary of State Antony Blinken asking, "How did President Biden get this so wrong?" you know the White House is in trouble. Finally, more than 1 million people have been detained over the past 12 months crossing our southern border illegally. This past week, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was caught on tape admitting to Border Control agents that the situation is, quote, unsustainable, unquote, and that the system recently came close to breaking. This is unconscionable, and it is Biden's fault for rescinding Trump policies that had stemmed the flood of migrants. The president has, from day one, brought a wrecking ball to every single policy enacted by Donald Trump, whether or not those measures were successful. Biden considers his greatest virtue that he is not Trump. He is correct. Polling shows that more people voted against Trump than for Biden. We are discovering that not being Trump is not good enough. Biden is failing, and he has only himself to blame. I'm Liz Peek, Fox News contributor.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Hey, it's Brett Larson, inviting you to download and listen to the new daily Fox on Tech podcast. There's part of a colorful late 90s iMac on Mars. It's an idea that seems a lot like Kickstarter, called Build It. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.